It may not seem like it, but we're actually quite close to finishing this series. We've done all the complex logic, now it's a matter of just putting it all together. So the next thing we're going to do here is figure out our data structures. We need to have two. One is going to represent the patient, and this is something that would clearly be used throughout the system if you were building a system for patients. We're going to do something that looks like this. We have the name, which is going to be a string, and the weight, which is going to have a value and the units. We're then going to have one more data structure, and that's going to be the form data structure. And that's going to tell us if the form is valid or not. And if it is invalid, we're going to have the error messages here as well. So let's go ahead and see how we might set this all up. What I'm going to do is write a new function, and that is going to be validating the form, and it's going to be called createForm. Or actually, let's just go ahead and export a new function. I'm going to call this one patientForm. What this is going to do is take a single argument, which is going to be a patient, and that patient data structure is going to be this one here, which has the name and the weight, and it's going to return the validity status. So for example, that is going to be this data structure down here, the name and the weight, and whether it is valid or not. So let's go ahead and see how that might look. Something like this. So in this case, I'm going to write a comment just to make it more clear. Patient is going to be this data structure, which is going to have the name, which is going to be an empty string by default. And then we're also going to have our weight in here. And this is going to be an object with the value, which is going to be a number. So maybe 100, for example. And obviously we need to have the units in here as well. So the units would just be something like kilograms. This is a really good case for TypeScript. You could use some interfaces to define this. I'm not going to do that right now, but it's definitely a good exercise you could do if you like to use TypeScript. Anyway, now that we have that, we need to figure out what this is going to return, and it's going to return the current validity status, so whether this is valid or not. And to keep things simple, we're going to go ahead and write another function, and this one is going to be called isValid, and it's going to take a patient, and it's going to return each of these fields and tell us if it is valid or not. I'm actually going to change this to be validate patient. I think that's a better name. And let's go ahead now and actually write a test, because that is going to be the easiest way to do this. In fact, I think we've written enough tests for now. Let's actually go ahead and implement this. We're going to use Vue, get something rendering, and then we'll come back and write the tests. So the first thing we need to do is come in here and validate this. So what I'm going to do is say return, and we're going to return the validate patient function and pass in the patient. And all we need to do here is validate each of the fields. I'm going to keep this as simple as possible and just hard code the fields. Of course, we could get fancy and use something like object.keys to iterate over all the fields, but I'm not going to do that one right now. So what we're going to do is return in here. We're going to have the name, and that's just going to validate the name, which we know is just going to use the required validator, and we're going to pass in patient.name. We're also going to validate the weight in this case, so we're going to use the validator we wrote earlier, which is called validate measurement. We're going to pass in the patient.weight here, and we're also going to need to grab the constraints, which we haven't actually got access to now. So we're going to have to figure out some way to get the constraints in here. I'm actually just going to type it here for now, and these happen to be global, so it's actually going to work completely fine. So I'm actually not even going to need to pass those in. They are going to be globally available to this function. So actually, yes, we do need to pass those ones in. Probably not the best design here. We haven't got much flexibility around this. If we did want to be more flexible, we could make it an argument to this function and pass it in here too. But for now, I'm happy with this simple little example. Let's go ahead and save this off. We have no way to know if this is actually working correctly. One of the bad things about not writing a test first, but we're going to write an actual Vue application in the next lecture and see if everything's working. So I will see you there.